ever needed to make a cake from scratch? Today I'll show you how. So first, we are going to need our recipes because we won't know what we need until we have them. And these are my recipes that I've adapted from Whimsical Bakehouse. Okay, so you're going to need to have a lot of bowls. You're going to need them for your eggs. You need a wide bowl for your flour. You need a medium-sized bowl for your sugar. It's always going to be around 2 cups if you're doing a typical butter cake. So here I have an extra large bowl, which is not quite as big as my 7-quart mixing bowl. However, this will suffice for using a hand blender, which is this, hand blender with the beater attachments. You cannot use a whisk to cream butter. Creaming butter is an essential step in your baking process. You're going to need your measuring cups, measuring spoons. You are also going to need a gram scale. Towards the end, you're going to also need cake pans. And these cardboard rounds are incredibly handy. The idea is that whenever the cake comes out of the oven and it cools enough to take out of the pan, you're going to put this on top of the baked cake and then turn it over on top of that so that your cake falls out nice and evenly on top of this cardboard round. If you ever mess up on your ratios just a little bit and your cake doesn't come out as wonderfully moist as you were hoping, a little secret that you can do is to also make what's called a simple syrup, and you brush in that simple syrup after the cake is baked, of course, and cooled, and that will keep it moist after it's been cut into. The golden butter cake calls for 6 large egg yolks, and because I am not at sea level, I also add 1 extra egg to my recipes usually. Makes a world of difference in keeping the structure and consistency. So I'm going to demonstrate how to separate your yolks from your whites without a silly contraption. Without any silly extra tools. You don't need extra tools to separate your egg white from your yolk. So you crack your egg, and whenever you go to open it, you carefully let the white drip out, and then you gently toss your yolk back over to the other eggshell. And so now you have most of your white into this bowl, and your yolk is pretty well separated. You'll have a little bit of white still trying to cling. But now we have our yolk. Oh, I had some shell go in there. The best way to get shell out of your egg whites is using the eggshell. For whatever reason, it just clings itself right back up to the egg. Pesky eggshells. Ta-da! Okay, so there's our butter. So we're going to be using 2 cups of sugar. I always add vanilla to the eggs because eggs act as a binder. Alright, so vanilla going into the 1 teaspoon. Oops. Okay, I go a little extra on vanilla. It evaporates. I'm going to be a little extra and just add the full extra teaspoon, half a teaspoon from what the recipe called for. The recipe calls for 3½ cups of flour. You want to make sure that you just level it off. 3½ cups. Okay, once again, we'll add to increase the amount of flour in my recipe. So an altitude adjustment when you're at 5,000 feet above sea level and higher is at 5,000 feet above sea level, you're going to increase your flour or your dry ingredients by 1 tablespoon. You're going to increase your liquid ingredients by 1 tablespoon per cup. Since this recipe calls for 3½ cups, I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour to this recipe. And once again, even though it's a tablespoon, you still have to measure it off. Level it off. You still have to level it off. Here we go. That's decent enough. Okay, so there's my 2 tablespoons. Feeling like the Count from Sesame Street. 1 tablespoon. Ha ha ha. 2 tablespoons. Oh, oh, oh. I need 2½ teaspoons of baking powder. This is my ½ teaspoon. I would normally mix this in at the beginning of my flour going into the sieve. I got a little carried away playing with my drum there, so 2½ teaspoons. So unlike our chocolate cake, this one does not call for baking soda. It only calls for the baking powder. Now for this, you just want to use regular table salt. I have regular table salt that is pink instead. Okay, now all of our dry ingredients are mixed together in with the flour. So there's my 1½ cups. And now I'm going to add in my extra 3 tablespoons of milk. We have our butter and sugar, our flour, baking powder, and salt, and our eggs combined with our vanilla and our yolks and our milk all pre-measured out, and all of our chocolate cake ingredients were already pre-measured out. So we are going to finally start the creaming process. And so I'm going to show you first how to cream butter using hand beaters, since most people have beaters or hand mixers at home. Notice once you start getting the hang of most cake recipes, you're going to notice that there is almost always going to be a creaming stage unless you're doing a different type of cake. Creaming is going to be butter, sugar, eggs at some, in some ratio of this to that. You're going to have your dry ingredients and liquid ingredients. There's always going to be 3 sections, and it just makes sense to weigh out and measure out your ingredients and write out your recipes in these kinds of sections so that you have them all ready to go. Here we have our 2 sticks of butter and our sugar just hanging out in the bowl together. And I'm going to take my hand beater and I'm going to start out on number 1 with the beaters all the way in the bottom of the bowl. It almost looks like icing, which is kind of what we're going for. I'm going to go ahead and scrape down the sides of the bowl. Then I'm going to whip it up a little bit more, and I'm going to incorporate the eggs. Okay, so we're going to incorporate in a couple yolks on low. All the way in there. We're going to get this egg fully incorporated. So I'm going to crank it up to the next speed, and I'm going to work my way up to medium. Okay, now that everything is incorporated, we're going to go from low speed up to medium. And we're just going to repeat 1/3 of the liquid and 1/3 of the flour. Okay, and now we're going to start again on very low. This part, I actually recommend stirring in your dry ingredients without turning on the machine first. Otherwise, the flour poofs up and you get a gigantic flour plume. Okay, now that everything is incorporated, we're going to go from low speed up to medium. Okay, I am scraping the bowl. It actually seems slightly thicker, as if it's more whipped up, and I believe that is because of using the double beaters. We are now ready to prep our pan so that these babies can get into the oven. The idea of drawing out a circle to fit the bottom of the pan is that we are going to cut it out, and this is going to save our cakes from sticking to the bottoms, or from the tops of the cake sticking to the insides of the pans. But the idea here is just to fit it right inside the top part by, oops, like this. And there is no marker here either. So now, unless you really love to do old-fashioned vegetable shortening around the sides of the pan and some flour in there and then patting it around and getting all the flour everywhere, you don't need to do that step if you have Baker's Joy or something similar to this. I don't know of another brand of a baking spray, but this has flour and non-stick spray incorporated into one can, and so it comes out kind of thick and gloopy. And the parchment actually helps to make it where we don't have to have a ton of this stuff surrounding our cake pan. Our regular non-stick spray does not work the way you would hope. I think the cake batter just absorbs it. So regular non-stick spray does not work. The kind with flour in it does. So for this, oh, look at all that fluffy texture. So and we want to fill one pan 3/4 of the way full, and the other one slightly more like half full. Like one pan should be heavier than the other, because ideally whenever you are done with the baking, if you were going to stack one cake on top of the other, you would want to put the thicker cake on the bottom and the skinnier cake on the top, because it will weigh less. I have this other handy trick, which are the magic cake strips. So, whoops, okay. So these, I had these soaking in water, and then I dumped out the water. So this is closer to what they normally look like with the silvery color. I just wrung out that extra liquid. So now this is just a damp little strip, and I'm going to wrap it around the outside of the pan. I am just going to stab this with a T-pin just to hold it in place. Just to recap, we covered the creaming process, how to measure out your dry ingredients and your liquid ingredients, and how to add them into your cake batter. Okay, time to go and check on that oven. One of these cakes is so far ready to come out. Okay, so I just pulled this cake out of the oven. As you can see, it baked very beautifully, almost flat, almost totally flat across the top, thanks to this bake even strip that is surrounding it. And we can tell that the cake is done in a couple of different ways. Even though it's a bit hot, the spring back test, if you gently push on the cake, very gently, just to see if it springs back up, and you can very carefully work your way to the center and try the spring back. Also, you see here the edges of the cake inside of the pan here are more firm, they cooked quicker than the outside, even though we had the bake even strips on, and they have begun to cool, and they are shrinking away from the edges. They began to shrink away from the edges while they were still in the oven, but now that they are cooling, they are continuing to do so. So this one is a beautiful example of a cake that is finished and is ready to sit out of the oven and cool off. Okay, here is the one that I kind of overfilled a bit. And here is how even that it baked. It's still domed up in the middle a little bit, but I did fill it 3/4 of the way full. Or actually, it was a little bit more than 3/4 of the way full. But similarly to this one here, I was testing via the spring back test. And the center here was really soft when I tried it in the oven. And it is now springing back. Thankfully, we adjusted for altitude, so the cake has this beautiful structure that we are looking at now. You can already see some of the crumb here. And that's just the part that is exposed. So these beautiful babies need to cool down for a little while.